Hello and welcome to Archive West Texas, a program dedicated to preserving and sharing stories of those who shaped our region. I'm Gordon Wilkerson, joined today as always by our producer Thomas Dye. Our guest today is Jim Arnold, president of the Helen Jones Foundation. Jim's a longtime educator and community leader in Lubbock, and he's here today to share a remarkable story with us regarding the Mallet Ranch, its history, its origins, along with his individual contributions to the community. We're very pleased to have him here today to discuss all things Mallet Ranch, the philanthropic legacy of Helen Jones, and the ongoing impact of her foundation in West Texas. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Gordon. I appreciate it very much.
Before we take a deep dive into the history of the foundation, let's start with a little background on you. You've served for many years, or you were a longtime history teacher at Atkins Middle School. Been very active in the Boy Scouts of America. Tell us a little bit about. I'm assuming you're a native Lubbockite. I'm not positive about that, but tell us about growing up in Lubbock, what Lubbock was like when you were a child, and how your background led you to work with the foundation.
Well, I was born in Dallas, and my father was a physician in Lubbock, a longtime physician, and they moved to Lubbock because of their parents lived in Floydada and Amarillo, and this was a central location. When I was probably about 5 years old, the south part of the Lubbock was 50th Street.
Might have been a dirt road.
It was a dirt road. As a matter of fact, I remember the ranch that was over by Monterey. Where we live today was all cotton field. As I grew up in Lubbock, we moved out to 56th Street, and that was the area that was probably the booming area of Lubbock. And it was amazing how it's grown. When I left for college to go to Texas A&M, basically the south boundary was Loop 289. And I would get on Loop 289 when I was in high school, and I'd say, why did they build this? Because there was nobody driving on it. I'd drive on it. And then when I came back from A&M, the south part of Lubbock was past Loop 289. Then eventually it got to 82nd Street, and now it's grown past 1585.
It's true. You can get out, or I can drive out in South Lubbock and not even know where I am.
Yes.
The development is staggering.
I went to schools at Wheelock Elementary, Parsons Elementary, Atkins Junior High School at that time, in Monterey. And then I left to go to Texas A&M for 4 years.
What did you study at A&M?
I studied education, curriculum instruction, and with teaching minors in political science or government and history. And when I came back, I got a job at Atkins, and it was basically Texas history. Then I taught several years of American history to the Civil War. Then I taught 1 year of world history. Very enjoyable. I enjoyed working with the students. As I told somebody yesterday, I enjoyed the day that I started teaching as the day I retired from teaching. It was absolutely a wonderful experience.
There's nothing like teaching to make a solid impact on future generations and to help mold kids with the skills and leadership. And
I agree.
Tell us about your work with the Boy Scouts.
I was a Boy Scout or Cub Scout. I started scouting when I was 8 years old. I went through Cub Scouts, then I went to Troop 522, and that was with my Scoutmaster, Mr. Mills, and I got my Eagle in 1970. I was always involved in scouting through camp rangers, camp staff. I went to Texas A&M, and I was not involved in Scouts at that time. I came back, and Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts gives you another view of of children. You could have the worst day teaching and go to a scout meeting, and it would totally change everything you did. I enjoyed camping. I enjoyed dealing with the children, the scouts. I enjoyed dealing with the adults. The adults were a fascinating group. I had more fun with adults sometimes than with the children. We went on backpacking trips. We went on camping trips. Basically, I went on a camping trip probably 9 times out of the year.
What troop was this?
I became Scoutmaster of Troop 406, and that's over at St. John's United Methodist Church. And it was a wonderful experience. But one of the neat things about scouting is that they had a wood badge management course, a leadership course. And I learned all my leadership from that management course. And they emphasized communication, knowing the resources, understanding the needs of the group, planning, evaluation, controlling the group, setting the example, sharing leadership, and advising individuals. And I have applied that to the Helen Jones Foundation, but I also applied it when I was teaching and the scout trip.
Let's talk about that transition. So you've got deep experience as a teacher and as a scout leader. How do you take those skills and make the transition into leading a charitable foundation?
Well, when you're a teacher, you have a variety of roles. Not only are you teaching, you're also documenting, you're also evaluating, you're also organizing. And for 19 years with the Helen Jones Foundation, I was the one that was running it after I took over Mrs. Arnold's position. And this leadership, I've always been interested in leadership. But this leadership from Scouts taught me so much with that of teaching that I could very easily take that position, the leadership, and go into the Helen Jones Foundation as the executive director and president without having any problems. But obviously you have to have mentors, and when I left teaching, Mom was still around and she took care of mentoring me. My father took care of mentoring because they were also on the board at that time. And but just applying the leadership skills, it was an easy transition.
All right. This is a good time for us to take a quick break. I want to remind our listeners that if you have a suggestion for a future guest on Archive West Texas, please email us at info@classical1057.org. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're continuing our conversation today with Jim Arnold of the Helen Jones Foundation. Jim, the foundation story has its origins in the Mallet Ranch. Don't know that all of our listeners will know where the Mallet is or what it is, but the history of the Mallet Ranch is quite remarkable. There's no way we can cover that in a single show, but give us your perspective. Give us the elevator speech on the Mallet Ranch.
Let me give you a little background on the Mallet Ranch. The Mallet Ranch was developed by David Mance DeVette. He was born March 2nd, 1856. He lived in New York. Matter of fact, he was a newspaper reporter for the Brooklyn Eagle. And he was doing very well. His brother, Philip, moved to Texas in 1876. And David came down for newspaper stories about how great Texas was and how it was economically thriving. And in 1880, he decided to come down here and live. Philip and David got together and they went to business as ranchers for sheep. So the first sheep ranch was over by Brady, Texas. And then the cattle began to come in and the grass began to get cropped too much, so they moved it over to Big Springs. And from Big Springs, they moved over to Midland, but by that time, Philip was not interested in ranching sheep, and he moved back to Fort Worth and went into land. And then there was a man named Sharber. I wish I could tell you his first name, but he was from Midland, and they went into the cattle business there. And eventually, Mr. Sharber decided to stay in Midland, and David was looking for new land. And that new land was land that was for public education. It was land to be sold. So he moved his cattle up into Hockley, Cochran, Terry, and Yoakum County. And he moved, he developed that open range, and eventually they closed the range, and he had a 53,000 acre ranch. That ranch was all cattle. Now, you had problems within this because there was another man named Colonel C.C. Slaughter that still wanted that land also. And they had to go through the court system, and state court as well as federal, and eventually David won that. Now, the ranch was basically all cattle. And then in 1937, they discovered oil on it. And the first oil well was drilled in 1939, and that totally changed the Mallet Ranch from cattle to minerals. And the vast majority of the money that comes from the Mallet Ranch even today is minerals.
I would commend to our listeners two books about the Mallet Ranch. One was written in 1995 by David Murrah, who was with the Southwest Collection at the time. It's called Oil, Taxes, and Cats, The History of the DeWitt Family and the Mallet Ranch. And there's a more current book with some exceptional photos from Wyman Meixner, Meinzer. It's called More Than Running Cattle, The Mallet Ranch of the South Plains, written by Scott Sosby. And taking a look through these books, one of them references the fact that when Mr. DeWitt bought this land, I think the Mallet Cattle Company might have been in financial distress, and nobody knows exactly what he paid for it, but he paid significantly less for the land than he did for the cattle that he had to put on it,
Yes.
which I thought was a compelling story.
Eventually, what he did was he sold parcels of the land or parts of the land to the Johnson family. So half of the Mallet Ranch belongs to the Johnson family, and half belongs to the DeWitt family. And
that's the case even today?
That's the case today. Now, the Johnsons have a lot of ancestors, but the DeWitt basically has a CH Foundation, the Helen Jones Foundation, and the Plum Foundation that was developed by Dorothy Gale Sechrist.
So let's talk a little bit about the DeWitt family.
Mm-hmm.
The patriarch, David M. DeWitt, you've talked about. His wife was Florence, and then they had at least four children?
4 children.
Okay, so those were
Christine, Harold, and then 14 years later, it was Helen and David. So basically, they had two families. One was the older family, Christine and Harold, and the other was Helen and David. Helen was 14 years younger than Christine.
Right.
Harold was about 12 years old. In 1902, he had a hunting accident, I think on the Mallet Ranch, and he perished. He passed because of the bullet. Then David, who was like 2 years younger than Helen, was was kind of the ranch manager, and he was driving from Lebanon to Lubbock, and he had a car accident. He hit a truck from behind, and he was killed. So the two inheritors was Christine and Helen married Bill Lee Sechrist, and they had a child named Dorothy Gale Sechrist. So the three inheritors are Christine, which is a CH Foundation, Helen DeVitt Jones, which is the Helen Jones Foundation, and then Dorothy Gale Sechrist, which is a Plum Foundation.
And the CH was that the brand at the Mallet Ranch? And
yes.
It was for Christine and Harold. Is that
Well,
correct?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows? Okay.
Nobody knows. It could be for Christine and Harold, or it could be for Christine and Helen.
All right.
Nobody was ever told.
The family had its share of drama and its share of issues. At the end of the day, it appears the sisters were able to hold on to the ranch, which in and of itself is remarkable.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that dynamic.
Christine, again, was 14 years older than Helen, and she was the dominant. When the ranch, when David M. DeVitt passed away in 1939, Christine decided to move from California and come to Lubbock, and she decided to run the ranch. And she was a dynamic person and very stubborn. And so she became the ranch manager. Helen allowed her to run the ranch, and the Johnson family was always having the fight with her, understandably. But Helen was in the background.
Right.
And then when Christine passed, Helen did not take over the ranch, but she had such good advisors to help her with ranch and with her finances and with her the beginning of the foundation that it took off.
All right. It's a good time for us to take a quick break. I want to remind our listeners that all of our Archive West Texas episodes, including this show, are available on demand in our station app and also on our website at classical1057.org. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're continuing our conversation today with Jim Arnold of the Helen Jones Foundation. Jim, in our last segment, we talked a little bit about the origins of the Mallet Ranch, how David M. DeVitt made his way from New York down to Brady, Texas, started out in the sheep business, moved into cattle, and somehow wound up with 58,000 acres in Hockley County. You referenced his legal battles with Mr. Slaughter. Cattle was apparently a solid growth industry in the late 1800s.
Correct.
But the ranch had its share of challenges in the next 30 to 35 years prior to the discovery of oil. Talk a little bit about that time period and what happened at the ranch.
Well, the ranch was pretty successful, but in ranching, you depend upon the rain. And if you don't get rain, the grass doesn't grow, and you can't put cattle on it. So throughout the time period, especially in 1930 and 1950s, we had tremendous droughts. So therefore, keeping the ranch going as far as cattle, it was almost impossible. the audience can understand this because we're in the middle of a drought too. Fortunately, this year we've had some good rain, but that's the problem that the cattle industry has, especially in West Texas. Now, during that time period, they thought about selling some of the ranch. As I said, the ranch had 49,000 acres of ranch land, but they sold about 6,000 acres of farming. So there are cotton farms, wheat farms, sorghum farms that belong to the Mallet Ranch. But some of these farmers that moved into this, the drought hit, they couldn't make it. They had to forego their land and send it back to the ranch. You got to remember back at that time, 140 acres was a lot because they were plowing with horses and plows. And I guess modern technology took over probably in the 40s during the World War II era. But it went through some major changes.
It seemed like I read that at one point, DeWitt considered selling to, was it the Wittenbergs out of
Yes.
Amarillo?
Yes.
And got close to discussions on that, but never sealed the deal.
And thank goodness. I mean,
Yeah.
think of the legacy that would have been missed, and think of what would have happened to change Lubbock. I mean, the two foundations have totally changed Lubbock.
Absolutely. So, both of the DeWitt's sons die tragically.
Correct.
Christine is 14 years older than Helen.
Mm-hmm.
Christine never marries.
Correct.
Becomes ultimately becomes a rancher, essentially.
Right.
Helen marries Mr. Sechrist. They have a daughter. They divorce. And then later she marries Tom Jones. Talk about Tom Jones. He was at one point the manager of the ranch.
Tom Jones was a friend of David DeWitt, M. DeWitt, the senior. And he helped with the management of the ranch, land, things of that nature. He was a very interesting man in Lubbock. He was very social, very able to deal with a lot of people. Now, Mrs. Jones at this time had a lot of health problems. So he lived in Lubbock, but Ms. Jones often traveled throughout the United States. She lived in San Antonio for a while, Dallas, Colorado Springs, went up to New York,
California as well.
California. Her mother was in California. Florence lived over by Hollywood. And Christine would go over there also, but basically Christine came back and lived in Texas. But Helen moved around until 1965, and then she came back to Lubbock, and she stayed in Lubbock.
And they had a house over on 21st Street.
Correct.
And both the sisters lived pretty close to each other.
Correct. And then there was another house with Christine that she bought for her cats. And that's why you have oil taxes and cats.
And I believe I read she was once evicted from the Hilton Hotel.
Yes. Instead of living in a house, she lived in the Hilton Hotel. And for some reason, she got a different opinion with the management, and they evicted her. And then she bought her house on 21st Street.
Now, early on, there was a banker named Sam Arnett who was a board member of the Mallet Ranch.
Yes. Now, Sam Arnett, I think his ancestors owned the V8 ranch.
I believe you're right. Yeah.
Matter of fact, I think when I was over at the Holden Hall, Sam Arnett is on the mural at the hall.
Oh, is he?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. What happened was the Johnson family and Christine got crossways, so they put it into a board, and one of them was Arnett. And eventually Christine won out. wore everybody out.
Christine made early significant contributions to Methodist Hospital at the time.
Yes.
When
She was very philanthropic. And so was Helen. Christine is one of the founding funders of the Ranch and Heritage Center, National Ranch and Heritage Center. She made a lot of contributions to the Methodist Hospital. Eventually, at the end of her life, she lived in the Methodist Hospital. Helen made contributions to the museum, Texas Tech. She was one of the largest donors to Texas Tech University individually.
That gives us a good spot to make a transition. Thank you for sharing the history of the Mallet Ranch. We're going to ask you to stay and do one more episode with us where we'll focus on the foundations and their many significant contributions to the Lubbock community. Thank you for taking time to share your story and also the story of the Mallet Ranch today.
And thank you, Gordon. I appreciate it.
This concludes today's show. Jim will be back with us next week when we'll continue our discussion. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson. Thank you for listening, and please join us next week for another edition of Archive West Texas.